All right, so everyone's talking about how challenging the upcoming couple of years are going to be from a budget perspective, and that means you need to take control of how dollars flow out of your organization. So, how do you do that? Well, it starts with the data, and specifically data on how, where, when, and with what frequency purchases are being made all across your various departments. You may or may not have a procure-to-pay platform that makes it easy to measure this type of activity, but to get you inspired, you should go check out Procurify's brand new Charter School Benchmark Report. It just came out a couple weeks ago and offers 10 procurement benchmarks from charter schools across the country, highlighting things like average PO volumes, spend per vendor, items per vendor, how long it takes to go from requisition to PO, and so on. Not only will you be intrigued to answer these same questions for your school, it might also shine a light on opportunities for cost control next year. You can go to procurify.com/resources to download a copy or check out the episode description, and we've linked to it there as well. All right, now back to the show.
Welcome to Charter School Insider, lessons from the nation's top charter school operators, the only podcast dedicated to the behind-the-scenes business of running a successful charter school. Join us as we sit down with charter school leaders who share how they are overcoming the biggest operational hurdles facing their schools today.
Trey, thanks for being here. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well.
Well, I want to jump right to the problem we're going to explore today, which is a lack of qualified or trained operations professionals. And I wanted to kind of jump right into that question. Why do you think this is an issue? And you can speak to this in your context in Mississippi, or also curious to hear kind of your thoughts on this more broadly, if you think that this is something that's common across the charter community.
Yeah, I'll speak to both of them because I think they're relevant to each other. So more contextualized in Mississippi, we're a pretty nascent sector. There's only 10 charter schools that are operating in the state. The charter law was passed in 2013, so we just celebrated the 10-year anniversary of that charter law. So it's a fairly nascent sector, which means that there's not a lot of folks who have gone through working at a charter school and kind of worked their way up in the ranks of charter schools to be able to serve in these operational leadership positions. And so there's not a lot of folks who are just kind of homegrown operations leaders in Mississippi. And I think more broadly, operations is one of those things you can't go to school for.
Right.
You can go get a master's of arts in teaching and be a teacher. You can get an administrator license and be a principal or assistant principal. You can do an EDD and get a doctorate in educational leadership, which may touch on system leadership and talk about regulatory stuff. But there's so much of the core of operations that you just have to learn by doing the work. And if in a nascent sector like Mississippi, there's not a lot of opportunity to do that yet. There will continue to be, hopefully, as we continue to grow the sector. But I think that's a lot of the things that are at play. We don't have folks who are homegrown and training on the ground, and we don't have a lot of programs that are developed to support folks in getting those sorts of skills they need to lead operations at a charter school.
I want to talk more about how you and others are working to solve this problem. But before we get to that, what do you feel like are the implications of not having this long, rich history of, a pipeline of operations leaders can't go to school to learn this job and come out and feel maybe prepared to jump right in? What do you feel like the result of that is? How are schools kind of wrestling with this lack of trained operations talent?
Yeah, I always tell my teammates, and I think even if I didn't say it to them, they would say it themselves, that operations is truly the backbone of the school. It is what allows the school to function and do the things that it does every day on behalf of kids. And so when you don't have folks that have that background, that know what operations is, and, just to clarify for the folks listening, operations is more broadly everything that's not instructional or student culture. It is transportation, food service, facilities, finance, systems, legal and regulatory stuff that we have to navigate. It's all those things that really allow the school to do what it can do for kids. So when you don't have folks that are able to do that, then you don't have schools that can scale, that can grow, that can support kids in a way better than they were supporting kids the year before. And you see a lot of turnover in these really critical roles. And so you're constantly trying to fix things year after year, that if you had more sustainability in operations, then you wouldn't have to. And you could really focus on what is happening in the classroom and how do we make sure kids are getting the best education possible, instead of how do we make sure that we have a bus route that is going to cover this location, or that our food service team is ready to go for the following year. When you have someone that's there, that's doing it every day and is constantly there year after year, then those things are a lot more shored up.
Do you feel like this impacts smaller schools more frequently than larger networks? Because you mentioned, obviously, one of the challenges here is you can't build the momentum or the strength of the backbone to scale the organization. And as you alluded to, operations, just the 5 or 6 different functional areas you mentioned, at some organizations, that's a single person's job, the food service director or the head of transportation.
Mhm.
But at smaller schools, it's one person that has to kind of be a expert, if you will, in all 5 of those arenas. Do you feel like this challenge is sort of acutely felt by smaller organizations?
I think it definitely is. I think to add a little more clarity there, I think across the charter school sector, we generally operate with pretty lean teams.
Hmm.
In operations, regardless if it's a larger CMO or it's a smaller single site school, then you're still going to have folks that are doing a ton of different things that are going to be doing all those jobs that traditionally might live in one role in a traditional school district.
Hmm.
But I think what's true about smaller schools is that you don't have a large enough pool of folks who are doing this work to pull from when there is turnover or when like you need to scale and grow. What's great about like larger networks and CMOs is like we have folks that may not be at that site but might be developing at another site that we can get ready to move somewhere else. But if you're, a single site school in Mississippi, which a large majority of our schools are because we're such a nascent sector, they don't have folks to pull from. And so it's really critical that there's kind of folks ready to go to take those positions when we need them.
So I want to talk about your journey in trying to tackle this problem or take on this challenge of building a pipeline of operations professionals. You have mentioned, in Mississippi, specifically 10-year anniversary just celebrated. I know you've been in the sector for 9 years, so you're kind of right at the birth of the charter sector in the state. And you put together or started to develop this idea of an operations leadership residency for the state of Mississippi. Take us back to the beginning. Where did you get inspired to start this? Is this kind of a reaction to your own experiences of having to learn on the job and being one of those people that sort of navigated your way through all these different functional areas? I'm really curious, sort of, what was the impetus for you trying to tackle this problem?
Yeah, there's a few things at play here. It's reflecting on my own experience. When I joined the organization that I'm with, which was Republic Schools in 2016, I was kind of doing an internship sort of fellowship type role for a little bit. And then in September of that year, I was asked to consider moving into a director of operations role for one of the schools. And the first like 4 months of that job was not actually doing that work at the school I was going to be at. It was doing a fellowship or residency of sort. I was a director of operations in residency. That was actually my title. I went to one of our schools in Nashville and I've worked there for a number of months to kind of build my operations chops. While there was an acting operations director there, I was kind of like a number 2 learning alongside them. And that was one of the most impactful experiences because it allowed me to step back into that school when I came back in 2017 and be able to like hit the ground running. And I ended up staying at that location, that school, for the next 3 years, leading operations there. And I felt year after year that I was more successful at my work because of the experiences I had prior to that. Since then, we haven't really done that program. I think it's pretty cost prohibitive because it requires basically bringing on another FTE that is just like learning on the job, which definitely has results and it yields things on the back end, but you got to be able to afford another FTE. We haven't really done that since then. But we have focused on training our operations number 2s, our dean of operations, to be ready to take on the assistant of principal of operations role at our schools. And so I've done some of that work and supported our teams there, which we haven't, seen a ton of success there because it's like you have so few people doing a lot of work. And so to train somebody to be ready for the next role while they're doing their existing role is also really challenging because then they're going to drop some ball somewhere else because they're trying to get ready for the next position.
Right.
And so all that kind of my experiences, knowing that that was true in our schools, and then having some conversations with an advocacy group that's here in Mississippi, Mississippi First. They've been longtime supporters of charter schools and also helped like write the initial charter school law. They also I had talked with them and they had felt that like this was a place where we needed to invest some energy and some money. And like, how do we actually get people ready? Because I think we were seeing across the sector, I know we were seeing across the sector, operations folks turning over. We were seeing schools facing challenges in the regulatory environment, in the compliance world, and like all the operations that allow the school to really exist and scale. And so we kind of came together to say, okay, how can we solve this? And so between bringing my experiences from what I had done personally, knowing what was true in my organization, seeing the sector from a bird's eye view of like what was happening between the other operators, we kind of birthed at this idea of let's put some money towards developing people in operations where they are not actually doing another role, where they're not actually part of another organization. Technically, they're like going through this residency and they come out of it in a year's time and they're ready to fill a vacancy somewhere in the sector. And so that's kind of where it came from. I can talk a little bit more about like the actual program as we get to the questions, but that's where it kind of birthed from.
I think that's super interesting, and definitely shout out to Mississippi First for having the foresight into investing in this space, because I think kind of like you alluded to, operations is often behind the scenes, sort of acting as the backbone of the organization. And so for, I think just broadly speaking, for philanthropy organizations or organizations that support the education sector, it's not always as maybe exciting to say we're investing in developing like quality operations professionals as it is saying, we're sharing this groundbreaking curriculum or this new technology that's going to totally change the way teaching happens in the classroom. But I think the flip side of that is there's a real ROI on ensuring schools are strong organizations that can operate. Ultimately, they run as businesses. They're just in the business of educating the next generation. And what could be more important to that? So I think that's really unique for the combination of your real world experience plus the backing of the philanthropy group to put this together. So tell us a little bit about what it looks like. How did you think about designing this? Obviously, I would imagine your own kind of residency experience played a part in that. But tell us a little bit about what the Ops Leadership Residency looks like today.
Yeah, let me take a little step back on the last question really quick, just to clarify one piece. So Mississippi First, I had been talking with their executive director and their director of special projects, who kind of is really helping me spearhead this work. And they had got a nice gift from the Bloomberg Foundation to support the sector at large. And there had been a lot of money kind of going into that. Was also another part of the conversation was like, how do we, and we knew that in a nascent sector like that was important because we had to like get schools to be able to like get charter applications submitted. They have to be able to like explain operationally and financially and facilities wise how they're going to operate. And so there was a lot of like that was in the conversation of like this needs to happen so that folks have at least a person who can help them get there whenever they're ready to move that direction.
Super cool.
Yeah. So on the designing piece, we really started with like, what is the intended outcome that we want to have for this program? And ultimately, we wanted folks to be able to come out of this thing and be ready to jump into the role and do the work and be 100% ready to do that. And that is rather if they're going to like help start up a new school and be like a founding operations director, or if they're going to move into a vacancy that exists somewhere in the sector. But whatever it was, can they do the things they need to be able to do? And then from that, we started thinking, okay, what are all the key buckets of work that an operations leader has to know? And there's, as we were alluding to a little while ago, there's a ton of these out there. There's tons of buckets of work that falls under operations, but really narrowed it down to 8 key buckets of work. And just to quickly like run through them, the basics of like, what are charter schools in Mississippi? How do you understand how charter schools exist in Mississippi? What do you need to know about the regulatory environment and whatnot? And then leading is the second module, is how we refer to them. These are like 8 modules.
Okay.
Leading really focuses on how do you lead yourself, lead your team? How do you, show up? And we ground a lot of it in Brene Brown's daring leadership. How do you show up as a daring leader? And then we go into academic operations. What does it look like to lead on assessments and being a critical partner with your principal around academic leadership? Managing facilities is another one. Systems and sustainability. How do you like actually sustain a school with the systems that allow it to like keep replicating and scaling over time? Compliance, and then enrollment and engagement. And then finally, finance is where we end the program with, and understanding kind of what all goes into the financial parts of a school and how do we manage assets? How do we understand our revenues and expenses? And yeah, so of those 8, the basics: leading, academic operations, facilities, systems and sustainability, compliance, enrollment and engagement, and finance, we really thought that kind of got at the heart of what operations is. I could have put transportation in there as its own thing. I could have put food service as its own thing.
Sure.
We think that fits into one of these, and we talk about them in the modules as they kind of become relevant, but those are kind of the core at what it is. And then from there, it was like breaking those down to understand if we spend 6 weeks on each of these modules, what are the like critical objectives that have to happen by the time that time frame is over? What are some key readings and resources that they need to engage with? And then we have a project that's tied to it to kind of help sum up that module that ultimately culminates in a capstone at the end of the program.
And is this for these fellows, or I don't know what you call people who participate in the program?
Operations leaders and residents.
Leaders in residence. Okay, awesome. So for these leaders in residence, are they, as they're working through this programmatic approach to learning the job, are they part of a school? Or you said this is a separate program where they're not actually part of a school, but are they embedded? Like, talk a little bit about how much of this is hands-on versus kind of classroom-based.
Yeah, I think this is really at the heart of why I think this thing is really going to work is because of this layout. And so they are actually embedded at a school. So they're technically not part of that school team because they're going through this program. And when the program's done, they will transition out to another role within the sector. But for the time they're in the program, they're embedded at a school between each module. And so they'll spend 6 weeks at a time at one of our schools within Republic where they're learning alongside an APO at that school. And so the goal is for them to kind of operate from the lens of a second APO. And so the APO that is there is like kind of narrating everything they're doing on a daily basis. They're allowing the resident to actually get hands-on experience doing those things. Last year, we were doing state testing, and at one of the schools, the APO had the resident actually lead one of the professional developments for their entire teaching staff, which was like a way just to kind of get them in at bat at what does professional development look like. And as I said, that's another one where that's not a module that's in here.
Right.
It's in the work, but they're getting that experience. So now when they leave this program and they go to operate a school in the sector, they already have experience leading a high quality professional development. And so they'll spend 6 weeks at each school. And then as the modules change, they move to a different school. It's the first year, so we've also been a little bit flexible with that. If like they're already working on a project at one school and it's going to take longer than the amount of time, then we'll amend the schedule there. We're trying to like figure out how to make this thing better year over year. So we're also being a little bit nimble in how we navigate it. And then on top of that, they're also getting very direct instruction and professional development. Some of it's from me. A lot of it, though, is from outside external folks who do this work professionally that develop operations leaders across the sector. And so I'm really grateful for those partners that have come in and helped develop these individuals.
Super cool. So I know you're in year one, and so this is, playing out literally as we speak. But I was curious to ask, as from sort of designing this on paper to implementing it, you have leaders in residence working through the program now. Have you had any learnings or kind of aha moments along the way where you've said, okay, next time around, we're going to incorporate this, or next time around, I want to add this? Just kind of curious as this has kind of come to fruition.
Yeah, a lot, actually. We've learned a lot. And I think there's more to still learn as we continue with the program. But I think the first one that I learned is like taking the time to find the right cohort or the right people to be in the residency. We originally wanted to start this thing in August of 2023 and run it through May of 24. So it would run along with the school year. And it was about halfway through this, probably towards the end of the spring of 23 and going into the summer, where we realized we had interviewed a ton of people. We had posted the role for both of these positions, and we had not found the folks that we wanted to do this. And it was the first year, so we really wanted to make sure we had the right folks doing the cohort. And so we made a really critical decision to hit pause and find another entry point into the school year, and decided to have our folks come in during Christmas, or come in after Christmas in January, which allowed us a little more time to continue to source high quality candidates for the role. And I think we learned that that was so important, because we found two people that are so invested in this, that really want to see change in the sector, support the sector, and want to grow in their own leadership. And so take time, find the right people, don't rush to just get it off the ground. I think there's a lot of internal buy-in that we had to do. And so especially with these folks being embedded at schools, getting the operations team to be on board and be ready to see these folks as a partner on their teams, but also as someone who's going to learn alongside them, and getting that internal buy-in. At some places, I think we had it right out the gate. Some places I had to do a little massaging to make sure folks knew that these folks were going to be on your team and going to learn alongside you. But getting that internal buy-in is something that we really needed to focus on right out of the gate. I also learned that we had to be open to outcome on this. I named this a minute ago, but the flexibility of it, I have this beautiful document with all the modules scoped out and the critical objectives and the key readings we're going to do and all that. But as the modules have gone on, I've had to make a lot of adjustments to meet them where they are, make sure they're getting what they need, understand where they are in context of their school site. And so I've learned to be a lot really flexible with the program and adjust where we need to adjust. The partnerships have been so critical that I didn't think about these on the front end. And as we got into it, I realized I don't want to develop folks on everything internally. Like they don't need to know how we as an organization do everything. They need to hear from folks outside of organization of like what best practices are, and like they need to hear other voices. And so bringing in other partnerships was something I learned pretty quickly into it.
When you say partnerships, what do you mean? Are you talking about other schools in the state? Or are you talking about sort of leadership development organizations or folks from outside of your, the immediate Mississippi charter community?
Yeah, let's say partnerships probably isn't the right word here. It's kind of a mix of things, like having them go attend trainings from the State Department of Education, also hear from other leaders in the sector. But I think most importantly, like I've engaged with consultants who do this work, who previously were in schools that were actually like leading operations in larger CMOs that are now have stepped out of the school world and are like supporting development of people outside of that. And that's been so critical, is like getting them to hear from those folks who have done the work, who know the work, and who now are like investing back in the sector.
Super cool. Yeah, totally.
I was really focused on like having the fellows like kind of do what was in this scope and in this syllabus, but they've also kind of just named for me what they want and what they need to get out of it. They're finding conferences and finding trainings they want to go to, and they're sending to me and saying, is this in the budget? Can we do this? I'm like, yeah, we can make this work, allowing them to do that in addition to what's in the syllabus. And I think for myself, I kind of questioned this whole thing. I was like, this is a lot to chew off. I'm doing my full-time job of leading operations across a charter network, and then and like running this residency program. But I think really leveraging other people and just reminding myself that like I can do this, and it's going to yield great results for the sector overall. And so that was I think the biggest one I keep reflecting on, is like, this is something that people can do. You can do this in addition to what you're doing, and it can have great results for kids.
So I think that's a perfect segue to kind of where I wanted to wrap us up, which is you're doing this in Mississippi. Obviously, we've talked about your specific operations residency program. And as you were just saying, you are in a very demanding full-time role while also launching this program and working with your ops leadership residents. What would you say to others who are listening to this, maybe other like COOs or senior directors of operations who are thinking, man, we could really use kind of a talent pipeline of operations folks, either in our CMO or in our state, or, I know my friend who's at the school down the road could really use a new DOO. What would you say to others who want to replicate something similar, but maybe are thinking, I can't do this, I don't have time for this, or maybe they're just nervous about trying to replicate something similar?
Yeah, I think that I would first say, like, don't reinvent the wheel. If this is something that you want to like continue to grow your pipeline, there are folks out there that are doing this work. And it's really kind of just happened in the last few years that we've seen a lot of this stuff really kick off. There's work happening in New York with the Ops Lab, if you've heard of that. Anders Lindgren is doing some great things with school ops in Washington State. And then we have, this program here in Mississippi. There's folks doing this work out there that I think you can like replicate off of. And it doesn't have to be, I think oftentimes we get kind of like pigeonholed to our own organizations. And we're like, if we can just like get people inside our org to grow, then we can support our org overall. And I think I would push that, like, as a sector, we have to just like work together a lot more. And like, when we elevate folks within the sector, we're not only elevating our own organizations, but we're supporting the sector overall. And so like, be okay to like using the tools and the resources and the experiences you have in your own charter network or in your own single site school to help support the sector at large. I know that's hard to say, especially in like really slam packed sectors where there's lots of charter operators, but I think it's just so critical to support the sector overall. I say start small. There's a lot of, we only have 2 fellows going through this initial cohort. Our plan is to grow that over time, but 2 we thought was the right number to start with. It allows those 2 individuals to like work and learn together while also keeping it small enough that we can manage it for now, as it's just me kind of managing it along with our school operations leaders. And then, I don't know if everyone has access to like a group that might have some funding that can support this, but it's pretty low cost. I think it is, we decided that we wanted to these folks are going to be in schools for a whole year. So they're salaried positions. They're getting paid throughout the duration of the residency. But, if there may be folks who just already have a full-time job and they just want to learn alongside so they can move into this work. And so there's other ways to kind of tackle this problem. And then I think lastly is don't hesitate to ask these folks who are doing this work for support. And, for me, I'd be more than willing to share sort of this model with folks and help them think about how to replicate it, because I think it's just so important. It's not competition of who can have the best operations people. It's how do we just elevate our work generally and support the sector at large.
Totally. Yeah. Couldn't agree more on the abundance mindset. There's more than enough opportunity to go around. And so I think really good advice in terms of not needing to reinvent the wheel. So if people are interested in taking you up on your offer, Trey, of learning more about your program, or kind of if they want to pick your brain about how the residency program is going, where should they go to connect with you? Or maybe if they want to learn more about Republic schools in general, where should they go to connect?
Yeah, for me, you can definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn, Facebook. Just send me a quick message and I'll definitely get back to you. We can talk about it. If you want to learn more about Republic schools, you can go to republiccharterschools.org. You can see all of our schools there and the work that we're doing in Jackson, Mississippi and Nashville, Tennessee. And yeah, and I'd love to talk about Republic in general and also just about the operations residency. So reach out.
Fantastic. Well, Trey, thanks so much for coming on and sharing more about your experience. And best of luck to you and the Republic team, as well as to your leadership operations residents this upcoming year.
Yeah, thanks so much, Daniel. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to Charter School Insider. This show is brought to you by BuyQ, the group purchasing organization specifically for charter schools. Want to learn how to maximize your school's purchasing power? Join together with thousands of other charter schools by visiting buyq.org/sign-up. BuyQ's purchasing program is free and has no obligations or commitments required. If you enjoyed today's episode, do us a favor and subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. If you have a question or feedback for us, we'd love to hear from you. Send us an email at podcast@buyq.org. Thanks, and we hope you'll tune in for the next one.